and I'm going to present the Z Best scandal, or as I prefer to call it, there's more than one way to clean a carpet. Let's begin with the brains behind this operation, Barry Minkow. He started the cleaning carpet business very young at the age of 16 in California. He entered into this particular industry because he thought that there were low barriers to entry, just the steamer and some willpower, and that he could make some decent money. This was not the case, as he realized that the market was dominated by a few large, already established businesses, and he wasn't making the income that he thought he would. So, to begin with, he was already off to a bad start as he started to defraud customers and commit credit card fraud. Things took a positive turn for Barry once they got into the carpet restoration for insurance aspect of the business. He was able to turn around the profits of the company, and at one point in 1986, the company was valued at $280 million, which, as you can see, adjusted for inflation, that would be about $556 million in today's current market. In reality, though, this surge in profits looked good, but he was really just running a giant Ponzi scheme. So, how did he do all of this? Well, he started off by creating several fake insurance companies, most notably the largest being an Interstate Appraisal Services, to pose as clients. He did this with the help of a Tom Paget, who was an insurance underwriter and was able to maneuver some of the forms and was familiar with the industry, so they were able to create pretty convincing contracts and documents. So as a result, this allowed him to create several fake large accounts and contracts in order to make the accounts receivable look really good and inflate sales, which in turn made his financial statements look better than they really were. He also admitted to kiting checks and shuffling money between accounts just to convolute the revenue stream and make it difficult for someone to pick apart and see how much money he was really making. Or, as Barry himself admitted, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. This also allowed him basically to book revenue, but there was actual no cash to back it up. So, of course, with this lack of actual cash, it just perpetrated or forced him to keep up the Ponzi scheme because he had to continually rope in new investors or create even more fake jobs and fake accounts. Eventually, Barry wanted to buy one of his largest and main competitors that he believed, once acquired, would make them solvent enough so that he would no longer need to perpetuate the financial fraud. So he was forced to go public, and as a result, he had to have his books audited. He contracted Ernst and Winnie, which is now known as EY, aka Ernst and Young, in order to do the audit. What he did, in part to fool the auditors, was provide them with false financials and documents that he claimed were independently audited from another accounting firm when they were private. He submitted these to the auditors. He also admitted to befriending the auditors by taking them and their families out to eat, and also gave them little incentives, as in let them work out of the nice offices, etc., etc. His greatest feat, though, his pièce de résistance, as they say in France, was he faked an entire job site in order to pull the wool over the auditor's eyes. So the entire production that he did in order to fake the job site to the auditors was they drove around and they found a building that was under construction. So he also then talked to the security guard that was there at night and had bribed the security guard to allow them to gain entry to the grounds that evening before the auditors showed up. So this gave them time to stage the building in essence, and they were able to put some of the branding up. They put a few signs up and made it look as if they were the ones doing the restoration, when in truth, this was a random, totally unrelated construction site. So once the auditors showed up, he and his team walked them through and made it seem like everything was normal. This is just one of the buildings that we're working on currently, as evidenced in our contracts and our financials. It also just happened to be one of the sites that the auditors had thought would have been one of the potential sites they would have been taken to, because they had drove around in town earlier trying to find these construction sites that were supposed to exist, and that happened just so happened to be one of the ones they thought would have been one of the construction sites. So it was a bit of boldness and a bit of luck that Barry was able to get away with it, because the auditors actually believed him. What led to Barry's downfall ultimately was back to his days as just a sole proprietor of the carpet cleaning business. One of the customers that he defrauded just never let it go. It was described in the LA Times article as a jilted homemaker. And she just pursued it and kept following through and sort of formed a coalition of other former customers that he had burned way back in the day. And they just never let it go. They just kept pursuing it until she eventually caught the attention of a reporter for the LA Times, and she had all this evidence compiled on her own. So that, coupled with the investigation of the LA Times, the article was published painting Barry in a negative light. And then that's what just caused more scrutiny. And that's when it was discovered that he had been faking everything from the start, and even did the whole production for the fake building or the fake construction site. So once all this heat was on him, he wilted pretty quickly, and his house of cards came tumbling down, so to speak. He was ultimately, on a side note, sentenced to 25 years in prison. And in prison, he said that he had turned a new leaf. He actually assisted investigators in detecting other financial frauds, and he proclaimed that he had found God. He eventually got released early, and he ended up going right back to jail because he started a church, or he was a pastor at a church, and then it was found that he still was up to his old tricks. He was defrauding people, and he's since back in jail. But it's kind of interesting. You can find a lot of his interviews because he was very open about how he did it. And if you go to YouTube, just type in Barry Minkow, you can find a lot of his interviews, and some of the tactics he used. I just covered a few of the what I thought were funny or interesting ones, but he does describe how he wined and dined auditors, how he tried to get the wives on his side because he felt if the auditor's wife liked him, they would tell him like, "Oh, not Barry, he's so nice," and that would influence the auditors. So he definitely had some interesting techniques, and it's a really interesting case. I just thought it was pretty funny that they staged this like Hollywood-like production to fool the auditors, and it worked. And that is all I have on Mr. Minkow and his carpet.